There is nothing we pilots fear more than an uncontrolled fire when we're airborne. If I had to choose between a dual engine failure in cruise or that, I'd pick the engine failure every single time. So the news that a state actor like Russia is now accused of trying to plant incendiary bombs on commercial aircraft got all my attention a few months ago when my team and I first heard of this story. And what we have now recently learned about this story should not make anyone in the industry feel any better. This all started back in July of 2024 when one or more individuals walked into a typical DHL shop in Vilnius, Lithuania. DHL, in case you don't know, is an international shipper similar to FedEx or UPS in the United States. Now, Lithuania is one of the Baltic states that happens to share border with Belarus and also with Russia's Kaliningrad enclave. And we don't know exactly how many people were involved or how many visits to this DHL shop that took place, but we do know that several packages were handed over to the shipping company's employees in order to be sent to several different addresses in the United States and Canada. Now, there are obviously some really strict rules in place about what you are and are not allowed to ship internationally by air, and that's because some items like lithium batteries, for example, can cause fires if they're not packaged properly or if they're subject to the wrong type of conditions. But in this case, intelligence officials would later determine that these packages were not just badly packaged electrical goods or other products. No, they were carefully built incendiary devices, designed to ignite mid-flight as the planes were crossing the Atlantic. Now, I will go into more detail about who these people were, their devices, and why they or anyone else would want to do this, but before that, I really want to make sure that all of you understand exactly what's at stake if a fire were to ignite inside of an airborne aircraft. First of all, it's important to point out here that we're not necessarily talking only about cargo aircraft in this case. A company like DHL, FedEx or any other package shipper might choose to use their own aircraft to ship parcels like this, but in many cases, depending on the origin, the destination and the available aircraft, these shippers might also just hand over the package to a contract shipper, who then might load it into the baggage hold of a passenger aircraft. As I've explained in previous videos, about half of the world's air cargo capacity comes from exactly that. Spare cargo space in the holds of passenger jets, so the risks would not have been small of that actually happening here. Now, I've already made a very detailed video about all of the information you need to know regarding things like cargo holds, fire zones and suppression systems that we depend on in our aircraft, and also about the rules that we have regarding dangerous goods, so I'm not going to repeat all of that in this video. But the key takeaways is that there are differences between what we're allowed to carry in the hold of a passenger aircraft and what can be carried in the dedicated cargo jets. And that's partially because cargo aircraft incorporate more powerful fire suppression systems so that they can deal with more dangerous materials and sometimes also with higher volumes of flammable items. But it is also really important to understand that a fire on board a plane might not act in the way that you might think when you hear the word fire. Many of you might have heard of accidents involving in-flight fires, like UPS Flight 6 in Dubai. That was an accident of a cargo aircraft, which I've actually covered over on the Mentour pilot channel. Or ValueJet Flight 592 and Swissair Flight 111, which involved passenger jets, and which I might cover soon. But what I want you to keep in mind here, when you look at those incidents, was that most people, when they think about fires, they basically picture a campfire or a fireplace crackling away. Intense, for sure, and potentially harmful, but more or less defined in its location. Now, before I became an airline pilot, I served as an airport firefighter during my national service back in Sweden. And part of our training there involved experiencing, for real, what an aircraft fire would actually be like. This type of training is often done in specifically prepared steel shipping containers, or you might have seen pictures or videos of dedicated fire training aircraft at airports used in that same role. Those aircraft may look a little bit odd, but that's because they have to be reinforced and made out of heavy-duty steel in order to withstand being burned over and over again. And that's because we're talking about temperatures that can eat everything here, including metal. Well, during one of those exercises, our commander decided that we needed to see how a fire in a confined space actually looked like. So my team and I dressed up in full firefighting gear and breathing apparatus and then sat down on the floor in one of those containers which had been fully furnished inside with plywood. We then lit a small fire in one of the corners and observed what happened next. Now, to start with, that fire looked exactly what you would expect. Like a nice little campfire crackling in the corner. But then as it started to get bigger, it started to sear all of the material around it, and the smoke that this emitted became blacker and more intense. The reason the smoke from a fire is black is because it still contains a lot of unburned material, which has evaporated from the surrounding material, and since that smoke is also very hot, it will initially start to rise up towards the roof. But here is where the enclosed space starts to make a real difference, because that smoke and its embedded fuel now will have nowhere to go. That means that it will soon fill up the space along the roof, and then it will start working its way downwards like a thick, suffocating cloud. Now we tried to stay below it by getting down closer to the floor, but eventually the whole space filled up with black smoke, and if this would have been in an aircraft, well, then it would have been this smoke that would have killed the people first. Only a few breaths of that is normally enough to completely sear the airways and to poison the lungs. But since we had our breathing equipment on, we could stay in and witness the real mayhem, which is what happened next. First, it was complete blackness inside of the smoke, blacker than anything that you could ever imagine, and in the background we could still hear the fire crackling away, but we couldn't see it. Then, as the mixture of the three sides of the fire triangle, fuel, oxygen and heat, became just right, a flash fire erupted, and that was something to behold. When it ignites, you first hear just a loud whoosh, and then everything burns. Not just actual physical things, no, everything, including the air around you. I saw flames forming in front of my face, hovering there for a second, just to disappear and then to form somewhere else. And it was both beautiful and utterly terrifying. The temperature inside of that container soon raised to hundreds of degrees within seconds of that starting, so we had to get out of there since our visors and the rest of the gear started to actually melt. Now the reason I'm telling you this story is not to scare you, but to explain exactly why all aircrew takes fires so seriously. If a fire would be left to rage unchecked inside of an aircraft, tests have shown that the time that we pilots have in order to get that aircraft safely down on the ground is about 15 minutes or so. After that, the fire will destroy the aircraft and everyone inside of it. So when I say that a fire on board an aircraft is the worst that can happen, I really mean it. And that's also why today's story makes me so furious. Now the point of the fire suppressions that we have on board our aircraft, and as well as our cabin crew's fire drills, is to stop fires from ever getting out of control in the first place. And things like the design of shipping containers in the holds are also supposed to help with that, by for example helping to deprive the fire of oxygen and to slow down the development of the fire to keep it from spreading to either containers. But the effectiveness of that depends on things like the nature of the fire, the materials involved and many other factors, all of which are things that bad actors who might want to deliberately start fires on aircraft would also be aware of, which makes this story even worse. Now in aviation, all safety systems are always built with redundancy, backup for the backup, so there should always be a safeguard in place to stop a small problem from becoming a big one. And to be perfectly honest, that's one thing that I have brought with me from this industry over to my own online safety habits. That's actually why I use NordVPN, today's sponsor. Their Threat Protection Pro works kind of like TCAS for the internet, spotting potential dangers before you can even see them. It actively blocks phishing sites, malware, trackers and intrusive ads before they even load, keeping you safe even when you're not connected to a VPN. I use Nord all the time when I'm researching aviation sources and hopping between reports and stories from all over the world, because it keeps my connection private, my data secure and the browsing experience smooth. So if you would like to try it out, NordVPN are offering my viewers $4 extra a month when you sign up for their 2-year plan, and you can do so by scanning this QR code or head over to nordvpn.com/mentor. And remember, Nord always gives you a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you don't risk anything out by trying. Thank you, Nord. Now let's continue. Now, we have already seen how Russia's war in Ukraine has affected the aviation industry in several different ways. For passengers and cargo airlines, the battlefield might be thousands of miles away from their routes, but its effects are still felt globally every day. This includes routes that have to be diverted away from or close to forbidden airspace, scarce or dodgy spare parts for airlines, seizures of leased aircraft by Russian carriers, which have taken years to sort out so far, and also aircraft that are still stuck in Ukraine. And then of course things like GPS jamming or spoofing of aircraft that are flying close to the war zones. But for the most part, all of these factors are essentially side effects. Even GPS jamming and spoofing aren't directly targeting the airline industry. Instead, they are done primarily to stop the fighting sides from guiding drones, fighter jets or munitions towards their targets. So at least to start with, the effects of these actions on airliners are incidental. But today's story is different. There is nothing incidental or indirect about the incendiary bombs that were handed over to DHL's agents. No, they were specifically meant to go onto airliners and to set them on fire. But why? Well, here's where we need to start talking about hybrid warfare and how it evolved before hitting the world of aviation. This is obviously a very broad topic, but basically this is the 21st century version of a Cold War, except it's a lot less glamorous. Instead of James Bond-style spies exchanging glances at casinos, this new war relies mainly on using Telegram to recruit local small-time drug dealers or other criminals in the right places. Those people are then used to do things like set fires to warehouses and to spread fear and confusion, all in order to undermine the confidence in local governments and to scare the people. Some of these reported attacks have previously involved sites related to the war in Ukraine, but others might have just been aimed at causing general disruptions and mayhem. In some cases, Telegram accounts have even been shown to use clips of previous industrial fires to promote themselves to other potential sympathetic recruits. And in summary, this type of warfare is a much more affordable way to disrupt the infrastructure of an opponent from a distance than a regular attack would be. But there's also a more practical reason for it. After Russia's rapid escalation of the war in Ukraine in 2022, Britain and other European nations expelled hundreds of Russian diplomats from their capital cities. And according to intelligence analysts in the UK and elsewhere, this then forced Russia to turn to proxies in order to handle work like arson and sabotage. And that didn't even start in 2022, by the way. Since early in 2017, a few years after Russia's annexation of Crimea, intelligence services in the UK alone claimed to have disrupted 43 late-stage plots like this one. And disturbingly, around 13% of those being investigated for being recruited are under the age of 18. In Germany, several people have also been arrested for spying and attempting sabotage on behalf of Russia in recent years, but others were arrested specifically for arson and for attempting to ship explosive devices, believed to be acting on behalf of Russian state authorities. There have also been attacks on other kinds of transportation infrastructure in Germany since 2022, including railways, and while the motive behind those attacks are less clear, the authorities describe them as deliberate sabotage. Then, coming back to aviation, some of the GPS jamming and spoofing has been affecting areas that border Russia, but have nothing to do with operations near Ukraine, like the Baltic states, for example. And in October of this year, ICAO officially condemned Russia for its disruption of critical navigation in these and other areas near its borders. So after hearing all of this, I guess that targeting air cargo and airliners directly perhaps wouldn't be that surprising. But how did these incendiary bombs actually look like then? Well, it turns out that they were built by modifying electric vibrating massage pillows by implementing a magnesium-based flammable substance inside of them. And that's according to the Wall Street Journal. Now, the authorities obviously didn't release many details about exactly how these devices worked, but we do know that magnesium burns at extremely high temperatures, which is why it is actually used for certain types of signal flares, and also it can't be easily put out using water. In total, 4 parcels were identified as having originated from that DHL shop in Lithuania, but more could have been sent either from there or from other locations. In September this year, Lithuanian authorities then revealed that those 4 devices contained 6 kilos of explosive or incendiary materials. And they also identified 3 individuals as responsible for this. A Ukrainian citizen with Russian documentation under a different name, a Lithuanian Russian citizen, and a Russian citizen. These people were believed to have organized and coordinated these attacks, and curiously, they were also thought to have been involved in organizing a fire in an IKEA store in Vilnius earlier in 2024. Apparently for symbolic reasons, since the colors of IKEA's logo are the same as those of the Ukrainian flag. I guess they've never seen a Swedish flag. Anyway, this was a bigger story than just these 3 individuals though. In addition to the 3 that were identified by name, Estonian authorities have reportedly also charged 15 other people from Russia, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia and Ukraine, according to Reuters. The Lithuanian authorities recently also revealed more information about the distance that these 4 packages had managed to cover before they were discovered. Because before September this year, we only knew that the German authorities were investigating a number of fires that were caused by incendiary devices in parcels. But officially, we didn't know where these parcels were or even how they were being transported. But now we know that one of these packages was discovered when it caught fire at Leipzig airport in Germany, which is a major hub for DHL and many other cargo airlines. It's not clear how that package traveled to Leipzig, but it got there a day after being dropped off in Vilnius in Lithuania on the 19th of July 2024, and it was just about to be loaded onto a flight heading for Britain when it activated. A second parcel then exploded on the 21st of July while being transported by a DPD truck in Poland, DPD being another European package shipper. And the third package actually made it to England, to Birmingham, where it then detonated inside of a DHL warehouse on July the 22nd. Finally, the 4th package was recovered intact on another DPD truck in Poland after it had malfunctioned and therefore failed to ignite. That was likely crucial in uncovering the truth behind this plot. Because unlike more typical bombs, incendiary devices are constructed in a way to give what's known as plausible deniability. That's an often used feature of hybrid wars, where one side wants to achieve a certain result without claiming official credit, but also with this getting enough exposure to send a message about what it could and would potentially do. In the case of a catastrophic in-flight fire that leads to a tragic accident over the Atlantic or somewhere over Europe, well, someone wishing to deny involvement could argue that fires can happen for loads of different reasons, like lithium batteries, for example, which can also self-ignite and rage out of control. Now, it is often possible to determine how quickly a fire started and evolved, which offers good clues about its nature, but its precise origin in a messy jumble of packages may still be difficult to pin down, especially if that evidence is then buried inside of a wreckage. So again, plausible deniability. But what would have happened if a device like this actually had ignited on board a flight as designed? Would the crew have been able to deal with it? Well, unfortunately, that's an impossible question to answer without knowing more about the device, its location, and at what stage of flight it would activate. But no matter the outcome, an onboard fire would still absolutely shake the public's trust in commercial aviation. Even if it would happen on board a cargo flight, the possibility of such a disaster would still likely have the same effect on the public, and therefore possibly shake confidence in global supply chains. But a key takeaway from this type of hybrid war tactics is that it would be a mistake to look at individual actions in isolation. More recent possible attacks, like the drones that overflew several airports in Northern Europe, are likely a different example of that same approach. And the same goes for ships dragging their anchors across the seabed in the Gulf of Finland to cut undersea cables, which has also been happening lately. And multiple analysts interpret these developments as a process where Russia is now possibly showing escalation in this campaign to test the reactions of both Europe and the United States. So the point here, according to these analysts, isn't just what Russia can do. Just as importantly, it's sending a message of what they are prepared to do. Other acts of recent sabotage have targeted storage and transportation facilities that have been involved in sending materials to Ukraine in order to support their fight against Russia, which I guess could be seen as legitimate targets. But the incendiary parcels that I'm talking about here were just randomly sent on aircraft heading away from Europe. And that's potentially showing preparedness to target flights randomly, which is a very different kind of message. Finally, the big question then obviously becomes, what can we as an industry do about all of this in order to protect our people and the traveling public? Well, I am sure that the world's airlines, cargo companies, handlers, and hopefully most intelligence communities are now examining these incendiary devices closely in order to see what they can learn from them and find ways to identify similar plots. That has already been more or less a constant goal for everyone involved, thanks to guarding against terrorism and other smaller and similar threats in previous decades. So dreaming up ways for people to attack aircraft and then working out how to stop those attacks before they even happened, well, that is all part of the process and the reason for many of the security processes that we already have today. Aviation has always had to adapt to current events and threats, anything from hijackings to terrorism and cyber threats, and we will adapt yet again to deal with this one. But it is likely that new processes to guard against these hybrid wars will also add delays and costs to everyone. Then of course, mitigating against someone as sophisticated as a state actor, if that is the case, will likely be a greater challenge than dealing with just smaller terrorist groups or lone actors. But again, all of this will depend on how much further this hybrid conflict will go. Now, I know that this is a very controversial topic for some of you, but in an industry where everyone is trained to guard against any possible safety and security threats, simply ignoring something as cold and blatant as this would be irresponsible, to put it very mildly. And if you found this story as fascinating and unsettling as I did, I know that you will share your comments and opinions about it below. And I would encourage you to try to look at this threat as objectively as possible before you leave your comments, and I'm really looking forward to see what you say. Oh, and if I were you, I would also closely examine the comments for potentially bad actors and bots, because that's another type of cyber hybrid warfare that is now becoming increasingly common, especially on social media. So watch out for comments that try to sow discontent, hate or fear, or tries to tear at the fabric of the society that you live in, because that's exactly the point of these campaigns, and we have already seen quite a few examples of that here on this channel. Now, if you like this sort of content, I think that you will enjoy the pilot perspective that Ben and I bring to current events over on the Captain Speaking channel, which is also available on all of your preferred podcast sources. My name is Petter Hörnfeldt and you're watching Mentour now. Have an absolutely fantastic day and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.